Hello, beings of light. Today I bring you the experience of an American woman named Karen, who faced complications during a hernia surgery. She was between life and death, left her body, and began to see everything from the ceiling. She also saw other dimensions. She was given a sign to verify her experience. Let's now hear Karen's incredible near-death experience. I was a physical therapist employed at a hospital in Alaska. I had suffered a herniated disc in my lower back. For several weeks I was treated conservatively with therapy and injections, but there was no improvement. During this period, I spent a lot of time in prayer and Bible study. Previously, I had undergone back surgery to treat another hernia before moving to Alaska. The doctor treating me advised that surgery might be necessary since conservative treatment was not working. He was unsure if another laminectomy would be sufficient or if spinal fusion might be required. Spinal fusion would mean a much longer recovery period and the possibility that I might no longer be able to work as a physical therapist. Once the decision was made that surgery was necessary and it was scheduled, I began to communicate with members of my church, as well as family and friends in New York, asking for their prayers and informing them of the surgery date. On the morning of the surgery, I remember the nurse who was preparing me, and she commented that I was the most relaxed person she had ever seen for a surgical procedure. My husband and my two young children, aged 9 and 6, were in my hospital room with me when they brought the stretcher to take me. They walked with me for a long time, and then were instructed to go to the waiting room while I was operated on. They kissed me and left. Once in the operating room, I remember moving to the table and having the IV line placed in my arm, through which they then administered my anesthesia. The next thing I noticed is that I was very close to the ceiling in the corner of the room. I was so high up that I was just a few inches from the ceiling tiles. I saw the doctor angrily cursing and ordering the nurses to bring more blood bags. I looked back towards the sound and saw my body being turned face up on the table. There was a lot of commotion with people coming and going, and I remember how pale my face looked. I knew it was my physical body I was looking at, but I felt no alarm or concern. In fact, I remember effortlessly moving through the wall and also heading towards a corridor, passing through the double doors of the operating room. It was funny that I didn't feel any resistance or sensation of touch when passing through the wall and the doors. As I floated down the corridor, I noticed an elevator door opening, and a man I didn't know hurriedly came out. There was something about his haste and evident anxiety that caught my attention. I observed, noting that he was wearing a brown coat and seemed to be carrying some kind of bag. He hurried towards the operating room doors and slowed down at the entrance when he encountered a man. I don't remember their exact words, but I knew the man who had come out of the elevator was a surgeon. He was annoyed at being slowed down, while the other man didn't think he should enter the surgical room in regular clothes. I didn't hear their voices, but I was telepathically aware of each man's thoughts. Unlike in the operating room, where I heard the doctor cursing, as soon as the surgeon entered the room, I stopped observing him. At this point, I began to ascend through the ceilings of each floor of the hospital, as if being pulled by some force beyond my own will. I continued ascending until I passed through the roof itself, and found myself in the sky above the hospital. Once outside, I began moving much faster, passing over the mountain range near the hospital and over the city. I was at airplane height. At this point, I realized I was moving so quickly that I should feel the wind passing by me and notice a difference in air temperature. But I felt none of that. I remember moving into a dark, cavernous area where I continued at high speed for some time before noticing a small bright light shining in the distance in the direction I was going. I quickly emerged into this intense light and looked at the rocky ground below me where my feet should have been and a rocky, rugged slope to my left. Looking up the slope, I saw the back of a man leading me and telepathically telling me that I should go wherever he went. I examined his back and noticed long, dark hair tied with a leather strap, a short tunic made of rough material, and also sandals with leather straps wrapped around his calves. I thought, this is not Jesus. Then we reached a ledge that opened to a beautiful pastoral scene of lush green lawns and vibrant flowers, unlike anything I had ever seen. There were huge shade trees scattered around. Beyond the field, there was a small river about 30 feet wide. We reached the riverbank, and I heard on the opposite bank all my loved ones who had passed away. They were gathered in a large group. I first saw my father and brother. They were as happy to see me as I was to see them. I noticed several uncles, aunts, and cousins in that group. Finally, I realized that some people I didn't immediately recognize were my grandparents, who had died before I was born. Even so, I knew who they were and could hear them telepathically saying how much they loved me. Before I could go to them and hug them, my guide who had led me until then communicated telepathically that I needed to go somewhere else first and that I should follow him. As I followed him around a bend in the river, I could see, in the distance, a beautiful Greek-style building, bright white, with many steps leading up to huge columns in front. Many spiritual beings, dressed in radiant white robes, were circulating outside, going in and out. My guide took me inside, where an enormous library full of tables and lined with books opened up. Many spirits were studying different works, and my guide communicated that this hall held the Book of Life described in the Bible. We continued to a room in the back, where some spiritual beings were sitting in chairs that surrounded a screen on the floor, like a glass-bottomed boat. They communicated that I should watch my life. Scenes appeared like a three-dimensional hologram. I could relive myself in all these events of my existence, but equally important, I could experience the impact of my actions and words on the people I had interacted with. None of the spirits condemned me for the painful things I had done or failed to do, but I felt very regretful and sad for everything I had done, and felt it deeply in my own heart. It seemed that everything happened very quickly, but it had a tremendous impact on me. I had the impression that these spiritual beings had been with me and helped me plan my life before my rebirth. They informed me that I could return to my life if I chose. Then they showed me, through the same screen, some future events of my life if I chose to return. Some events would definitely happen, and others were possible but not certain. The next thing I remember was my guide showing me the following scene. The doctor who had operated on me was standing in the waiting room, dressed in his full green surgical attire, except for his mask, and talking to my husband, while the children were sitting behind him on a couch. I couldn't hear any words spoken, I just saw the scene. Then I saw my daughter's prayer forming the last link to reach us. Suddenly, all the emotional ties to my husband and children returned to me. I remembered when I was a little girl, at 7 years old, urgently praying for my father not to die. It seemed that my prayer had not been answered, and my father passed away. At that moment, I knew I couldn't let my children grow up without their mother, as I had grown up without my father. As difficult as it was to leave this place of overwhelming unconditional love and indescribable peace, I knew I had to return to my life. I was told that some things from my future that had been shown to me would be removed from my memory, so my future choices would not be influenced and would be genuine. And I would receive a sign that everything I had experienced was real. With that, the next awareness I had was waking up in the recovery room with my husband and children around me. Everything I wrote was completely in my mind and also in my heart. As I greeted my loved ones, my sign was also there. My sign was not an object. It was the fact that I was completely enveloped in that peace that surpasses all understanding, like an invisible bubble of protection. This incredible feeling stayed with me with tremendous intensity for about 3 weeks before gradually fading away. After it faded, I knew more than ever that my experience was completely real. The gift of divine love and peace that was with me all those weeks was the perfect proof and confirmation my heart needed. I stayed in the hospital for 12 days after my surgery, first in the ICU and then in a regular hospital room. It was complicated for a while, but I had complete confidence that I would recover because I knew I had returned to my life for a noble reason and was here to stay. Initially, I didn't tell my family about my experience and remember how surprised I was the first time the surgeon who had saved me came to my bedside for a visit. We had never met before that time, but he was the same man I had seen running down the corridor into the operating room. He was called urgently to operate on me. Unlike the surgeon who had performed my back surgery, who barely entered my room and didn't look me in the eye, this surgeon was warm and kind. He clearly cared about me and was pleased to see that I was recovering well. Shortly after being home, but before the follow-up visit with this doctor, I shared my near-death experience with my husband. I wondered aloud about the message I had received about the memories that would convince my logical mind of the veracity of my experience. I remembered that my experience included seeing the surgeon arriving on the day of my surgery, in a hurry, and if I could confirm what I had seen about his arrival of that day, it would indeed convince my logical mind of the validity of what I had lived through. Although I obviously already knew it was something real also because of the sign I had received, I wanted my husband not to have any doubt about it. So, after the surgeon completed my examination and expressed how pleased he was with my healing so far, I said I wanted to ask him something about the day of my surgery. I told him that during my back surgery, after my artery was cut, I was losing a lot of blood and my spirit had left my body and traveled outside the operating room. I told him that I had seen him arriving that day, although I didn't know who he was or why he was arriving at that moment. I told him that he was running towards the room and was wearing regular clothes, carrying some kind of bag. He was irritated at being stopped from entering the surgical room when he was clearly anxious to enter. I asked if what I had seen had really happened, and his response was, "How do you know that?" He was in his office when he was urgently called to the operating room immediately. He needed to perform emergency exploratory surgery to locate and stop the bleeding from a vessel that was cut during the surgery. I left convinced that he had confirmed to me the validity of everything I had seen. The fact that he had gone to the hospital wearing regular clothes, instead of already being there as an on-call surgeon, was an unusual circumstance. I knew he confirmed all this to me, and for me, it was enough to convince my logical mind, and my husband was also very convinced. During the surgery, it was discovered that I had endometriosis, so I also visited the gynecologist for follow-up. During that visit, he asked about my recent abdominal scar. When I explained what had happened to me, he exclaimed, "It was you." He was in the adjacent operating room that day and heard a real commotion in there. I didn't share my NDE with him that day, but it was another confirmation for me that what I had seen there was exactly correct, especially the swearing. I was inspired to find the surgeon who had performed my emergency surgery. He is still practicing in Alaska. I wrote to thank him and asked if he remembered my case and my near-death experience shared at that time. He replied saying that he remembered both me and my shared near-death experience. Reflecting deeply on what I had seen during my near-death experience and what could be confirmed by someone other than me, I also talked to my daughter, who was 9 years old at the time and is now 43 as I write this account. I asked what she remembered of that day. She also said she heard noise and saw a man hurrying through the waiting room, acting as if something bad was happening. The man hurried towards the elevators. She said it was the same man who was later introduced to her as the doctor who had saved my life. Can it be confirmed more than this? Anyway, she became more worried later when no one had come to talk to them yet. Then, the surgeon who had performed my back surgery finally came to the waiting room door, and my father went to talk to him. They were so serious that she was convinced that I must be dying. At that point, she said a prayer for me. Look at this incredible story. Karen had several proofs, and we also have through her account, that NDEs are not just mere hallucinations or dreams, but something real. She had various confirmations, like the doctor's confirmation of what had happened that day, and her daughter's account. I hope you enjoyed this story. Like and share for more, and thank you for watching till the end.